Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's VIN-dow with Robert Honeshead. Good morning to you, Bob, and I know what's on the docket today. We're going to be talking all things condition reports. We all deal with them. We all see them every day. Let's just dive into it. Hello.
Hey, Sean, how you doing?
Good, sir.
So,
Real good.
Just because you said the word, my blood, I swear to God, I could feel my blood pressure going up. It's weird because you brought up the topic. And it's a topic that, like everybody, in the trading world anyway, not everybody. Most people had no concept of what a condition report is. But anybody that actually buys and sells and has their balls directly on the line on a daily basis, it's very rare you ever hear somebody say something good about a condition report. And I'm going to give you some historical reference as to this, how and why this all came about, right? Because I remember being like, in the first couple cars that actually got sold on simulcast, and I was asking Greg Gaiman, who was standing down below me, I said, Greg, in other words, when we did this thing, how these people, it's all about trust, Bob. So in other words, the reason they're bidding on your cars and they ain't bidding on nobody else's cars is because they trust you. They know if they don't like it, they can give the bitch back. So we've been doing that for not like newbies that are doing it. Like we've been doing that for, in my case, I would say 40 years. In other words, screaming on the auction block, if you don't like this mother, you ain't allowed to own it. Do you follow me? So we scribbled on windows of cars going back, in our case, 50 years. Local 100 new car trade ain't got no paint work, never been smoked in, spare ain't never down. In other words, on and on and on. Got this, this, and this. That scribble on the windows of 500,000 cars that we did through the years, in the snow and the rain and the things or whatever. In other words, I wouldn't allow a car to go across the auction block without a condition report. But of course, it wasn't a condition report. It's what we're saying on the window of that bitch, that when you buy it, you don't have to really look too careful because we're telling you what it is. The lighter ain't never been used, so it ain't a smoked up pig in that Eldorado. You understand what I'm saying? And if it ain't that way, you ain't allowed to own it. You follow me? You're not allowed to have it. If you wanted it, you can't take it if it ain't what we're saying. So in other words, that's your words on the window of that car that carries through all the way back to when you get there. We had armies of dealers who would say, Jesus Christ, can't wait to see them cars coming off holiday from Manheim because look at who. In other words, it's kind of like a residual thing that flowed through. And Jesus Christ, Bob, I paid too much for that freaking car last week. No, it's the first fucking car I sold this week. I said, really? You make any money? Yeah, we made a lot of money. Then let me ask you a question. Did you pay too much for that bitch? Ha, 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 very funny, right? So condition report, that was this crown on the window of every single car, whether it was a good one or a bad one, don't make any difference. You're telling what you smelled, touched, drove, those hamburgers going through the auction block to basically put your signature on those cars. You're no longer like a who struck John, GM lease returned, it was in lease, you bip, it was a previous Hertz thing, who knows what. In other words, you're making it like a little personalized thing. You follow me? So now CRs start. And I remember distinctly standing on the auction block when, in those days, we used to get 700 people logged into our lane. 100, not 60 or 70. 600 or 700 logged into the lane because dealers, they could buy without no fear, and they like to watch the clown do whatever we do and so forth. It's kind of entertaining and so forth, whether you like it or not. You're up in the grandstands watching, right? That creating the critical mass of validation, let's say, that if everybody else is there, why ain't I there? It's kind of like going to a restaurant with no line. You're waiting to eat dog piss when it gets served to you. That's why there's nobody in the line. You understand what I'm saying? And the vice versa of that. Okay, so, and here comes let's say it was a something or other, F-150 in bright red, like hoovering into the lane. You follow me? Just as fat as you could possibly see one. Maybe it was 4 or 5 years old, whatever it was, but just a stone cold creamer. You follow me? And I look down and I see what the CR is. It's like a 2.2. And the general manager, I'm looking at his bald head from where I'm standing. I start MFing him. Like, what a moron. Could you possibly? So it got to a point where it's because if there definitely was a very minuscule piece of bird shit that must have landed on the car while it was out on the lot, like up by the thing, and we before they did the CR. So this, and this. And I'm telling you something that you don't even have to think about. It was as fat as you could find a car. And we turned it into a total junk. I think Mike Nicoletti, if I ain't mistaken, was the account manager at that time. And I absolutely went ballistic. I couldn't do nothing about it. I couldn't help it. Because what you're doing is torturing a totally sellable, but not just sellable, everybody dying to buy a car and turning it into a junk, and now everybody's got a question mark in their brain. Well, why is this a 2.2? I can't see it. Must be something hidden. It's got to be a piece of shit, and we don't know why. And therefore, you're afraid to jump in the water. Therefore, you're afraid to be the first one in the water. You understand? Because the professionals said that this is a 2.2, 1 something. You understand? Now, from that point forward, right, it's like a circumstance where it's just happened. And if that goes back 20 or something, 25 years ago, it just happened in the last couple of weeks. You know, we're buying a couple. We got a Nissan dealer that needs RDR cars stamped. So, you know, we're buying 20, 50, 70 of these Frontier pickup trucks. And they come off the truck with the plastic on the seats and the plastic on the paint. And I'm looking at the CR. It's a 2.2. It's not a car with miles on it. It's not a car that ever had the plastic off the paint. But the CR is a 2.2. So when you hear everybody come, hey, CRs are all this and they're all that, well, that's a two-way street, Daddy-O. That ain't a one-way street. That is not a one-way street. You follow me? We just recently had a brand new Ferrari with no paint work, a brand new car, right? On a CR is a full repaint because the person that's doing it don't understand one thing or another. You understand? So it's not a one-way street. Well, that wasn't a 4.0. That was a 2.6 in your mind. Okay. And then it gets to the point where when you're not putting a dollar value next to the condition. So you know in AccuTrade, Sean, we built that in specifically thinking that this would be the universal condition report because it's the only condition report that actually associates what a 4.2 means on a $100,000 car and what it means on a $2,000 car. You understand? And what happens is when you make it a 4.2 on a $100,000 car, it's a $3,500 bill, something you're going to spend $3,500 on in order to get it to where it's supposed to be. But on a $2,000 car, it's a 4.2. It turns out to be $42. Why is that? Because it's an old pile of horse shit. It's not the same, but we're using the same lens to value both without having any association with a dollar value. What it would cost to bring it back to, in other words, whatever, make it a 5.0. Whether it's a tire, would you take $800 off for a tire on a Rolls Royce Cullinan? Possible. Would you take $800 off on a $2,000 Jeep Compass? Probably not, right? But in other words, we still have the same association of whatever the number is without having any relationship to what the cost means. So when you do that little slider on AccuTrade and you make a $400,000 car a 4.5, yes, it definitely has a $8,000 difference in price because there is something there. It's going to cost you a lot of money. And vice versa when you do it on a piece of shit. In other words, it's a $10,000 something, and it's the same identical issue, and it turns out to be a 3.9. It's absolutely $380. See, this is the other thing you got to bear in mind. A $10,000 car ain't going to get, with 87,000 miles, ain't going to get the same recon in terms of physical, in other words, the key scratch, the other thing that you're going to get on a certifiable BMW. They're two different things, but we're using the same lens. It doesn't work. It can't work. It never could work. And as we built this tool and as we even did everything we possibly could to coach the people in charge of whatever standardized air condition reports theoretically, which obviously is bullshit, from all auctions using different ones. There's nobody has two same ones, and everyone brings out a new auction, and they got a whole different system of what a CR is and what it means or what it don't mean, which will never, ever work in a million years without a single constitution, the constitution of CRs that is categorical Canada, United States, any place that we use simulcast where you can bid on a car from another place. without a universal condition report that when it says 3.2, it means $2,800 in recon. You understand that? And you can then dig into the CR to see where your 2,800 is, because an instant clear windshield, you follow me, with a star with legs is different than a Jeep Wrangler, with a $180 windshield, as opposed to a $3,700 windshield. It's the two different things altogether, two completely different things. And when you look at what they're pointing out with their little ruler, in other words, things you're pointing to as a scratch that if I had compound on my balls, I could rub it out. I could rub it out with no problem. But you see, you got somebody right in the CR that ain't never had a buffer in their hand, don't have a, and I'm not complaining about these people. They're doing a job. Got to have them doing a job. But let's say the system itself, the fact that it's not a universal condition report that's based on dollar values in relationship to the number, based on the category of inventory. You follow me? That same little tiny bird shit on a Ford F-250 work truck is a little bit different than what it's going to be on an S-Class Mercedes. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different altogether. Different scrutiny of the retail. And if we don't keep this in mind as we build this, right, it is doomed to be what it is today. Meshigas, where nobody really knows what is and what ain't, and therefore it creates chisma, right? In other words, gossip that is never ending, with no result. It's just frustration pouring out of people's faces without any frame of reference, what specifically and what, how, and under what use case, and what your buying profile is compared to the other buying profile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's really the root of the problem. It's like, let me ask you a question, Sean. The best golf courses in the world are designed by who? Non-golfers? Honestly, I'm asking a serious question. They're designed by people who really understand golf, right?
Absolutely.
Or not? It's an Arnold Palmer course. It's an Arnold Palmer course. Well, who cares? You don't know nothing about golf. Oh, he's the world's greatest. I got it. And so, in other words, and let's say, for instance, who designs the best racetracks in the world? Non-race drivers? Or no, they don't, do they? You understand? And who would design the best CR in the world? People, good meaning, went to college and probably has a master's in something or other, who knows what, and ain't never one time, ever, once, been in an auction, bid on a car with your balls on the line. In other words, your cash coming out of your pocket and you're stuck with whatever you just did. In other words, somebody who never did that before, you think that CR is going to be useful? And again, I'm not criticizing anybody, because everybody has a job and somebody has to do it, and AAA does this and that and things. Not one of those people have ever actually done what the intent of the CR is for. They've never done that job. You follow me? Get up, get excited, go there, do this, check it out, think you stole one, think you didn't, write a check, now you're on a hook, put the car in central dispatch, get it stolen. You understand? Never get the car back. Trucker's an asshole because it has a dent because the CR said it wasn't there, but now it's there, and vice versa. You understand? So the people designing it, who have never golfed, they've never hit a golf ball and designed the golf course. You follow me? And that's what we are relegated to use. This is not a statement of conjecture or speculation or anything else. It's strictly a, let's call it analysis of boiling down the facts of how we got to where we are today. Why we built something that, when it's presented to people in the position of enabling it to happen, no, we'll do our own. We know what we do. You know what you do, but you never did it. That's the only small twist to the story. You see what I'm saying to you? I know how to go to the moon. I'm not an astronaut, but I had to get there. A little bit different than actually being the astronaut that has the last bidder, and then you're whining about a condition report that could have easily been fixed, right? Locking everybody in to know exactly how much you're going to spend on that bitch. And if you spend $3 more, $3 less, it's a lot different than saying, well, it was a 4.6. What the freak does that mean? What's that mean? It's got to translate into reality of Maybe you fix it, maybe you don't, but you know exactly how much you would spend, and maybe because of your buying profile, your dealership profile, you wouldn't paint a quarter panel because of a key scratch that would buff out anyway. Do you understand? It's it's very. That's why I say my blood pressure goes up, because having skin in the game for 6 decades of doing this shit, the last 3.5 of those decades related to what happens with a CR, and then listening to people saying, "Well, that guy's a cheat. He did this, and that's a car that has a," and you look at the whole thing. It's like a point of frustration. It's kind of like being Israel in the middle of 42 Arab countries, and the CR happens to be Israel. It's always the problem, and they don't have no voice and all the rest of it. And maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong, but there's no way to actually acid wash the problem, to stop talking about it and actually come to a resolution. You see what I'm saying to you, Sean? Does any of that make any sense to you or not?
100%. One of the questions I would have, or I got a couple of different questions I want to ask you, but what about knowing what the algorithm does and being able to manipulate?
But see, now, don't do that. Don't go AI on me, Shorty, because just bear this in mind. Just bear this in mind. Right, so when you go in and you say a PDR ain't going to be no more or no less on a $400,000 car or $10,000 car, because a PDR is a PDR. You understand what I'm saying to you? Nobody's charging you extra because it's some moron Rolls Royce. It ain't happening. You follow me? So a PDR is there. So paint is paint. Paint don't know the difference if it's paint or it's paint. If there's a key scratch that will or won't buff, and you're going to paint it or not paint it, now it's a different story. See? Because it's under 10 G's, you're definitely not going to paint it. You're going to sell past it, right? And now you're going to paint that quarter panel. You see what I'm saying to you? And that number turns out to be $675. You follow me? Whatever it happens to be. It's related specifically to, if we put it in our body shop plus 10%, you follow me, what it would cost to fix. Same thing with windshields. Same thing with seat bolsters. Same thing with, name 47 other things. You see what I'm saying to you? So that number is related to specifically, not some triple retail, God did the work, it costs more because of that. No, a number that would be very difficult, unless you're a world-class asshole, to argue that number's not relevant. Do you see what I'm saying to you? Now the dealer, based on what the car is and how much we can see, the guy that put his balls on the line and wrote the check for the car can make a decision if he's not going to do it or not. But what we didn't do is eliminate. See, this is where the crux of the frustration is. When somebody looks at a 3.2, and they said in V-Auto that you're not allowed to bid on 3.2s, what you did is a 3.2 may or may not be a 3.2. More than likely is not. But if you could say it needs $1,100, and that's why you were calling it a 3.2, you did not eliminate 37% of those buyers from buying the car. You see that? When they categorically search by CR, what you just did was you categorically eliminated willing, capable, really bright people that are using a system that is flawed because of a CR number, not a recon number associated with the CR. You see what I'm saying? Because in most cases, whatever those items are, and when you look at it, and the car has giant tits, and it's hoovering, it's gorgeous, do you understand? You might not necessarily need to do that little thing. You might not need to do it, because it got enough personality you can get past it. Different story when you're trying to resurrect from the dead some silver Hamburg with no moon, no nothing. Yeah, you may need to get it to the next level, but that's also specifically in the core of the brain. In other words, the skill set of the buyer to know what he's going to do with that bitch and how he's going to manipulate or not manipulate the reconditioning. Does that resonate at all, Shawnee?
Yeah, so are we throwing out auto grade?
Auto grade depends on what auto grade is. If it's auto grade used on, Sean, here's another problem. So it's easy to bitch and moan about CRs. So what is there? How many CR writers are that use auto grade in the country at all auctions, at all places, things, whatever else?
Point.
How many are there?
500 auctions, what? dozen, 20 at each auction.
So there's thousands, right? There's thousands of them. So how much more do they get paid than a person working at McDonald's?
Yeah.
I'm just asking. No touche. I'm asking a question. So
they don't get paid much more than a McDonald's worker.
Okay. If that's true, how do you hire and train them people to know what buffs and what don't? What touches and what don't? Bad touch-up paint, which I scrape off with your fingernail, and there's nothing but dirt underneath of it. How many thousands of times have we done that? Scrape with a razor blade, the touch-up that's there because somebody did it with a shoe brush, you understand? And by the time you get back and touch it correctly, you can't even see it. It's impossible to see it because you buffed it again, and it's perfect. It doesn't amount to anything. But those skills come from decades of midnight shit in the shop. You follow me? Getting your turds ready for the auction the next day to be sure that their tits are hanging out. You follow me? In other words, because you only got that 30-second window to get all the money in the world, otherwise you ain't going to survive. And that, not to be dramatic, that creates like all-nighters in the shop, Shawnee. You understand? And that creates then the frustration that it's at a different level when somebody comes up to your car and pisses on the windshield and smashes the side of the car with a 2.2. You understand that, Daddy-O? In other words, it's justifiable homicide in my mind when that happens, and your only frustration is to scream, but you're screaming into the forest because who you're screaming to don't have receptacles. In other words, their frequency is not set on yours because they ain't never done it. And that is not, again, I don't want to sound like an arrogant, I know, but I don't want to sound like somebody because it's us. We're proud of our profession. We do this for a living. We don't just do it for money. We do it for money, but we do it for a living. And if you take any pride in it, in other words, you get insulted, like really grossly insulted when someone that is in the industry, but they really aren't, is in a position to be ignorant. You follow me? And that is, I think, to a certain degree, one side or the other, maybe not as profound when people's complaining about somebody's CR. Their CRs, they're getting paid off. I ain't never seen nobody getting paid off. I'm dumb and I'm naive. I get that. But I ain't going to bullshit you. If anybody's susceptible to do something, it could be me. I ain't paying nobody off to change the CR. I ain't doing that shit. Because honestly, on the other side of that, if you're doing somebody don't like it, I'm taking that bitch back. I ain't even arguing. It's not even like up for debate. You follow me? It's because if you don't have trust, if you can't trust the CR, then you have to trust the seller. If you can't trust the seller, then you're playing Russian roulette. Go to the casino. What are you doing at the auction? Go roll dice somewhere. Same thing, right? And that don't work. It all falls back to not having a universal, like no special thing, just a universal, fact-based, impossible to lie about, backed by seller condition report. You follow me? Well, not all sellers will do that because, rental car companies and banks don't do that. It's no problem. To just say this is a condition report, but it ain't got nothing to do with a guarantee. You follow me? It ain't guaranteed, so you're on your own, pal. Hope you buy it cheap. I hope you bought it for free. You follow me? That's good. And there's plenty of people. Once again, Sean, their retail profile enables them to do that. They don't need the best car. They need a cheaper car. They need a car with paintwork. They need a car that somebody ain't going to get in and say, this smells like baby shit on top of cigar smoke. They don't mind because them people ain't buying cars. They're buying payments. Buying a car and buying a payment are two different things. They're two different cars. It's all the car business, but one's got nothing to do with the other. You dig it?
Yeah.
Hey, Shawnee, did I put you to sleep over there, or what happened? What's up?
No, now my brain's just turning over. So the final thing is, what do you think the chances of a universal condition report ever being accepted?
Zero. You want to know why?
Yeah.
Zero. And you want to know why? Because until someone listens, and I scream for years and years, and nobody pays attention. They can't hear. And the reason they can't hear, they're tone deaf to what the issues are of a trader, a buyer, or a seller. They're unable to hear it. And the people they invite into their groups to talk about things are either also brain dead, but they're not controversial. They're fine not telling you the truth. See, my problem has always been, I ain't got no fear of the truth. Somebody can tell me my breast stinks. I'm going to listen to you. I ain't going to smack you. You follow me? They can tell me anything they want. I'm willing to listen and learn. You follow me? And I ain't got the kind of ego that says, well, you don't know. No. problem is when you have a job that starts at 9 in the morning, ends at 5 in the afternoon, you're reading your 401k every day, your balls ain't on the line when it comes to buying and selling something. You follow me? And you're in charge of creating something that is going to be used because an organization said this is what we're going to use. Once again, everybody in the organization, none of which have ever been in a situation of buying and selling nothing. They could own an auction, but that don't mean they know nothing about it buying and selling nothing. It does not mean that. Not to say that all don't, but the vast majority have no clue. They're there to make sure everybody comes. They have a nice place, and the auctioneers come. They pay them. They stand on a thing. They park the cars nice. They go find it when a trucker comes and all that type of thing. But that ain't got nothing to do with buying and selling. It ain't got nothing to do with it, right? So when they're in charge of creating this system of how we're going to value the car in terms of its condition, without players, in other words, without Arnold telling us where the curve goes and how come the pit needs to be that big next to the tree and all that kind of thing, right? While we're building the golf course, it's doomed to be. It's when I say it's doomed, we're going to sell a bunch of cars tomorrow. Use the same thing we have for the last 50 years, but 40 years, 30 years, whatever it was since we started doing this CR thing and simulcast, which we're never going to do without. Right, it's a wonderful thing. It's great until last week. We have it, and nobody can turn on the sound because they changed the screen because they didn't check it because they ain't got no skin in the game. They don't care if nobody can turn on the sound, and we can't understand why a $50,000 car ain't bringing $20,000. It's because all dealers can't hear the auctioneer. And somebody tells me, well, if you can't hear the auctioneer, buyers tell me that they don't. This is a management person telling me that buyers don't really care about the sound on simulcast anyway. And the bad part is when somebody's serious when they're saying that. Now you know you're in cloud cuckoo land. You follow me? If that were true, why would we even bother having auctioneers counting a car on simulcast? Why bother with that? Send them all home. Just put the car there for 30 seconds and see who bids.
Yep.
It's funny, but it's tragic, brother. And it really actually then lends itself to how these insane situations, once they're ingrained, they're there for good. Nobody's ever going to change it, and no one's ever going to listen to change it because that would also require attention and then also require a fundamental knowledge of what buyers and sellers do at an auction. Just a fundamental understanding. We wouldn't even ask you to write a check where your balls start to shake. You follow me? No, we won't do it. And that's what it would. That's, I guess, to answer your question, 700 words or less. That to me is the unfortunate reality that, I'm going to hit the wood box and nobody's going to be paying attention. Before I hit the box.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
You got it, guys and girls. Have fun. Dig, dig, dig.